Hey everybody, today we are sitting down with Chris Brown where we wanted to have a bit of a discussion to talk about the types of questions that we get from our customers and potential customers when they're looking to introduce usage-based pricing models into what they already have. So they've got some fears, some concerns, so we wanted to kind of talk a little bit about those today to see if some of those might match some different questions that you might have as well. So welcome, Chris.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. All right, so let's jump straight into it. So I think one of the things that we always have a conversation with people about is, I want to bring in some usage-based pricing flexibility, but what should be my value? What should I be measuring against? What's valuable to my customer? And what are the types of situations or types of advice that you'd give people in with those types of questions?
Sure. So we'll look at it in a few different aspects, right? We have customers that are in communications, some that are in IoT, some of that are, SaaS or X as a service. If we start with the last one, that's probably the most complicated. You got to look at what you're offering. If you're offering, software interactions, it's going to be each of those interaction points. That might be an API call. It could be some kind of like event they're triggering or workflow. Look at what the customer is using your software for, and those can often be things you start to measure. What's really important in determining the right value metric is looking at what data you have access to, right? And so we typically start there, saying, what are you outputting? What can you output? If you haven't had any data output yet, let's look at what we actually see the customer doing and how they're using your software. That will start the discussion around what's the right value metric for you. And then we can look at all the possibilities.
Right. And I think that's key. I mean, a lot of the times I know I've been on calls with your advice to people like, okay, well, what information are you gathering? Are you gathering any information right now on how your product's being used by your customers? And that's always kind of that first step is being able to, make sure that and you can record how your products are being used. So I think one of the other ones then is like, okay, great. I now have figured out, the valuable part. So whether that's the number of API calls or the certain types of events that are firing up, well, what's the right usage model? How do I start to introduce what's going to be right for my business?
Yeah, so I think the important part you started at there is let's start capturing the data. Often what a lot of people do is they start looking at, how do I price this, right? Once you start passing the data through, you can start to say, okay, I'm going to capture all the different types of events like we talked about, right? Maybe I have API calls. Maybe I have some data that's passing through the system. Maybe it's some mousetraps going off in an IoT device, right? Or in the amount of grain I'm measuring. Let's capture all of that data. Let's start rating it and mediating it through the system. And then let's look at what that data looks like against the services you're selling. Because how you price is going to change based on how your customer's consuming it and with what. You may find a couple different avenues. There's the straight usage-based model, where every unit you buy or every unit you use, I'm going to price it at some value, right? Per minute, per message, per API. You might want to bundle some things in together and, say everyone that has the silver plan gets 50. They don't tend to use more than 50, so I'll give them a nice bundle of that. And if they go over, there's some overage. And then there's a whole bunch of that, options beyond that. So but start with processing the data, see how it measures against your actual products and services and the customers you're using today. Then we can start looking at the different models that are there. And there's probably about 10 or 12 common ones that we can share with you.
Yeah, I mean, you can do tiering, you can do, flat rate inclusion with overage charges, you can do pooling. There's all sorts of different ways to do that. And I think that's the key is really understanding, what that would look like. And you can kind of run it through the system and see what some of the different billing models could be, because you might have set in your mind that it's going to be 10 gig included and everything over top of that is overage. And when you start running that data through, you realize that 90% of your customers are using 20 gigs a month and they're paying a price today. And well, that would be giving overage charges for everybody in those scenarios. So, what are some different things and how do you start figuring out how you would be calculating overage? Is it all part of that same kind of forensics of looking into the data to figure out where you set those levels for overage?
Yeah, a good first step is looking at your customer base and that usage that you process through and say, what's the fence, right? What's the majority of my customers using on a month-to-month basis? Some people refer to it as like fair usage, right? So if I measure my customers on that silver plan and they're all doing 50,000 API calls, a month, that might be my bench. I'm going to say, hey, 50,000 API calls are now included. I know 10% of my customer base is over. So maybe if I start with that bench, I can go start to sell them, straight overage, try to find a way to upsell them and let them feel a little bit better by giving them more and letting them expand. But you got to find that base point. And what we often find is measure it first, monitor it, and then introduce limits, right? Give your customers some time to get used to it, right? Instead of throwing in there. We've had a few customers that have had these limits in place, started processing usage through our data, and suddenly they feel a huge amount of overage is going to show up on a bill, and they're afraid to give that customer that overage bill. So find ways of introducing it slowly. Don't shock them.
Right. And I think that's part of it, right, is figuring out if you are looking to introduce, there's introducing new type of pricing into your catalog, and then there's like, well, we're switching over from subscription into pure usage, or we're doing these different changes. So I think there's a lot of fear there of doing a wholesale switch over, because there's like, okay, well, what's going to happen if we do this and we start charging this overage, or we start charging people on a different pricing, and it becomes way more expensive for some but way less expensive for others. And what kind of advice would you give maybe for how you start easing into that and onboarding customers into that? Is it introducing new product offerings, or is it changing up pricing on existing ones? What have you typically seen work well in the field?
I think in most cases it's both, right? And so, marketers will be used to like A/B testing, like, incoming offers and, which customers are going to adopt. But on the pricing side and deciding how you're going to onboard these strategies through your customers, you want to do the same thing. Take that measurement data that we're processing through the system before you make those pricing changes, and upgrade some people, right, to that existing product, and other products leave it as is and introduce a new product that they can move towards and an introductory offer. Invoices are the greatest place to supply that information to the customer. You can tell them ahead of time, hey, we're introducing a new offer for you. It's part of your service. Here's what your typical usage is like. Here's what it means to you. Or you're on this plan, we're going to allow you to upgrade to a new plan, which is cheaper and includes less usage because you don't need it as much, but has higher overage. So you can start to play with those concepts across your invoices and see what the customer feedback is like, as well as the metrics that you measure yourself. So that's generally kind of the best concepts. The other option is, just go out and ask your customers, right? Perform some surveys, let them know what you're thinking about, take some key customers that you have today in the high ends and the middle ends, and get some feedback from them as to what they'd be receptive to.
Yeah, and I think contract renewal is probably another point to being able to have some of those different discussions, right? Saying, hey, we're looking to make changes in price points. Your contract is coming up. Here are some different ones that I think would be advantageous for you, or here's ones where we see we're going to be, sunsetting these different plans because, well, maybe they're using way more than what they're paying for out of your services. So those contract renegotiations are areas as well for probably another place to kind of introduce, here's some optionality for your customer as you move forward, right? And hopefully all for the advantage of the customer. And I think one of the things that is always a little bit scary, because going through and doing some of these things, and we're A/B testing and we're going through different sorts of things with pricing models, is how do we predict revenues and doing revenue forecasting as we go forward? Is this, is it all magic, or is it basically historical data? Does it all come back down into being able to see kind of 6-month, 12-month rolling averages previously to be able to see what it might look like in the future? Yeah. What typically do you see from a forecasting?
So from a forecasting perspective, there's 3 models that we see like customers using. One is they look at their customer base and say, what am I selling them? The typical subscription with some kind of inclusion, that's just like forecasting a normal subscription business with unlimited usage. You just put some bounds on it, and those bounds are within most of your customer base. So it's pretty consistent to do that the way you would do a normal subscription. You then have like a prepaid offer where I'm buying in advance some amount of usage, and that's good for an amount of year. Again, that's fairly easy to predict, right? One of the things that we offer as an advantage in that model is some kind of notifications as part of that drawdown that can be embedded in, to your sales process, your finance process, as well as RevRec and customer base. So you can say, hey, I'm spending faster than I should be. And then the last one is kind of looking at the overage model, right? For that, you kind of look at your historical patterns. What type of customer is it? What's their business like? Is it seasonal, or is it pretty steady? Is it growing or not? And you can mitigate those. As you see customers with higher amounts of overage, it gives you an opportunity for upsell. You can move them into other more inclusive packages. or get some prepaid add-ons or a few other options like that to stabilize your revenue predictions.
Right. And I know one of the things that we've been encountering quite a bit recently, and maybe it's due to helping to kind of do some forecasting, but this concept of a consumption drawdown model, right? This idea of instead of a flat subscription, it's more of I'm agreeing to contract X amount of money with you, and I want to dabble in a few of your different services. How does that kind of work as well?
So a great example, everyone's familiar with Amazon Web Services. They offer thousands of different services, environments that you can buy and use for whatever amount you want. The problem is that I don't know what you're going to use, right? So what a lot of people have been doing when they have a service that they want to offer through a consumption-based model is they go to the consumption drawdown model. Give us $10,000 a year, $10,000 a month, $10,000 one time. And what that does is it gives the consumer a predictable spend they can use over the lifetime of that agreement, the contract, the cycle, gives you predictability in the revenue, but then lets them taste all of the services you have to offer. The more they try, just like with Amazon Web Services, the more you start using, the more your footprint into those grow and you're less likely to leave, right? So you can take that approach with the drawdown model and simply say, I'm giving you a dollar amount to spend. I don't care what you use it on. Use any of our services, try them all, it doesn't matter. Versus the traditional, say, telecom way of like, you got 10 gigabits of data. You have 100, SMS messages. You got this much X API calls. You can use those models as well with our platform, but the consumption drawdown model, people are starting to move towards, especially in the X as a service industry, to give them more choice and flexibility for their customer base.
Awesome. So I think that covers a lot of the main questions that we get from our potential clients that are out there around how do I move and step into a usage-based model? What are some of the different ones that I can use, and how do I get prepared to be able to do that? So thanks a lot, Chris, for joining us. Thanks to everybody online for joining in the video, and hopefully you found a lot of value in the discussion that we had today.
Take care.